What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Let's continue our conversation with the city of brotherly love. Yes, South Philadelphia. And you had some great arenas in those neck of the woods. But it reminds me of a bout that took place between Battling Levinsky, who was a light heavyweight. He was a light heavyweight champion. And he would take on George Compartier. He would take on Gene Tunney. And he would lose his America's Light Heavyweight Championship title. But George Compartier was a very good fighter. He was known as the Orchid Man. But Battling Levinsky had 3 contests in 3 different cities in one day. Johnny Carter, who was known as the Dancing Machine, had a record of 33 total bouts, 8 losses, and 21 knockouts. He was a bantamweight out of South Philly. You had Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was a light heavyweight champion, had 136 total bouts, 12 losses, and he was a very good fighter. You had Eddie Cool and Tommy Spingal. Mike Evans, who had 31 total bouts, 8 losses, and 2 knockouts. He was out of South Philadelphia. He was a lightweight. Midget Wargas. He was another good fighter. You see, Russell Peltz was a very good promoter during that time. And the Spectrum would have shows October 17th of 1967. They had 16 shows, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It was on Broad Street and Patterson Avenue. First bout was Smoking Joe Frazier, Tony Doyle. And what was amazing about Joe Frazier, he opened up the Municipal Building in 1967. And he would also open up the new Madison Square Garden on 50th Street. 2 different buildings. And Joe Frazier opened up both of them. Yeah, Bad Benny Briscoe, when he took on Bill Douglas. Bill Douglas would have a son by the name of Buster Douglas. James was his first name. And he would knock out Mike Tyson in 1990. February 10th or 11th, if you're counting Japan. He stopped Mike Tyson in 10 rounds. But Bill Douglas was a very good middleweight. And he would take on Bad Benny Briscoe. Briscoe would also take on Eugene Cyclone Hart. I met Eugene Cyclone Hart and Bad Benny Briscoe and Bill Douglas, Willie the Worm Monroe, Bobby Boogaloo Watts. I mean, sat down and had conversations with them. I remember the conversation I had with Bob Montgomery. We were sitting down and we were having a conversation. But before we had the conversation, Harold Johnson, magnificent light heavyweight champion, he would take on Jesse Bowdy when Archie Moore would be stripped in 61 and 62 of his New York SAC and NBA titles. Well, it wasn't the NBA at that time. It was they had changed it to, what was it, the WBA. I can't think of these titles now. There's so many of them. But Harold Johnson I was talking with him, and then he called Bob Montgomery over. Hey, Bobby. And he called him over, and we started talking. And I got to know Bob Montgomery very well. He was very open about his past boxing history and what the times were during his day. He talked about some of the wonderful fights with Ike Williams and Bo Jack and many of his contemporaries. That was a lot of fun. Marvin Hagler would take on Bobby Boogaloo Watts and Willie the Worm Monroe. You had Marvin Johnson from Indianapolis. Curtis Parker, Jeff Chandler, Roberto Duran, and Matthew Saad Muhammad. All of these men would fight at the Philadelphia Spectrum. I remember when I was at the Matthew Saad Muhammad fight. I was at a couple of them. And Matthew Saad Muhammad, if you learn his story, he was found wandering around in a park. And his brother ditched him because his aunt couldn't take care of him or Matthew, who was his younger brother. And his older brother decided it wasn't going to be him because one of them had to go. And so he would play red light, green light, 1, 2, 3 in the park, and Matthew Saad Muhammad would turn around and his brother was no longer there. And a nun had discovered him and named him Matthew from the scripture. And Saad Muhammad came when he was Muslim, but Matthew Franklin was his name. It was on Franklin Avenue. And so Matthew Franklin would be his new name, and then he would change it to Matthew Saad Muhammad. But Matthew Saad Muhammad, I was introduced to him. I knew him, but I didn't know him personally until Kevin Kelly, Flushing Flash, who I met. We were very good friends in Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn, 75 Front Street. And Kevin Kelly was fighting at it was the New York, what was it? The New York Hotel. It was a couple blocks away from Madison Square Garden, and him and his stablemate Virgilio Tour would both win titles. One was 130 and the other one was 126 pounds. And they would win the New York belts. And Matthew Saad Muhammad was there, and Kevin with his belt, and he was holding his daughter. Never forget this. And he came over to me. And he brought me over to Matthew Saad Muhammad, who, by the way, if Kevin is listening, he would tell you, Matthew Saad Muhammad was his favorite fighter of all times. And he introduced me to Matthew Saad Muhammad. That's how I met him personally, but I always knew who Matthew Saad Muhammad was. I actually met him, but not through a first name basis until that evening. So that was a special moment for me. And then after that, I've always spoken to Matthew Saad Muhammad. Tim Witherspoon, South Philly. He was a puncher. Started late in his life. But Tim Witherspoon, he used to spar with Muhammad Ali. And if you talk to Tim, he'll tell you. He would be at trying to think of place in Catskills, and he trained with Muhammad Ali, but he had a trainer with him, and it was Mike Tyson's trainer. Oh boy, my memory! I'm trying to think of these things on the fly. Aaron Snowell and Tim Witherspoon came up to camp. And I see both of them up there. And I think Aaron Snow, I don't think he was a trainer at the time. I think he became a trainer through Tim Witherspoon, if I'm not mistaken. Don King was the promoter. And Tim Witherspoon on his 15th professional bout would take on Larry Holmes. It might have been 1983. And he had a good account of himself. He was a true professional. He wasn't seasoned yet. He was only 15 bouts. I think he had 7 amateur bouts, but 15 professional fights when he took on Larry Holmes. And I'll tell you, he did a lot better than Marvis Frazier. Marvis Frazier was stopped by Larry Holmes. But Marvin Hagler and Tim Witherspoon, all of those young men used to train in those gyms. I would watch them train all the time. And it was just so many of them. Oh, what a day. What a day in time, Philadelphia. It was a thrill watching these young men. It was just a thrill. West Philadelphia, the Convention Hall, Civic Center. Joe Frazier's professional debut, August 16, 1965. And Joe Frazier would be 11-0 with 11 knockouts. And he would take on some great Philadelphia fighters coming up at that time. The Convention Hall was brought to Philadelphia. It was once known as the Municipal Auditorium. This was in 1931. It was designed to hold up to 16,000 spectators. And it was held from 1940 to 1948, the Republican convention. And then I think it was when was it? 1936 to 48, 1936 to 48, if I'm correct, the Democratic Convention conference. But, oh boy, you had so many good fights at the convention hall. And once again, promoter Russell Peltz was a matchmaker as well. And this is obviously before the Ali Act, but he did it all. Russell Peltz was a very important factor in Philadelphia. You had bouts with Joe Louis, Steve DeRazio, 15 rounds. You had Sugar Ray Robinson. He fought as a welterweight. Marty Servo, 1941. And when Robinson defeated Servo in 41, he defeated Sammy Angott. You just knew he was going to get a title shot, but they kept rejecting him. I think Robinson fought in Philadelphia 8 times. In fact, I know he did, because when Ray Robinson came to Philadelphia, he always brought guys with him. He never sparred with the guys in Philadelphia. He always brought guys with him, and he would spar with them in Philadelphia. But the key names you had later on, going towards the 70s, you had Jeff Chandler, who was a very, very good bantamweight. And he would take on, I think it was Gaby Canizales, and that's who he took the title from. But Jeff Chandler was a very, very good fighter. You had Jerry the Bull Martin, who was a light heavyweight. Bill Douglas and Ed Crawford, Marty Feldman, Bad Benny Briscoe, Dan Snyder, Richie Bennett. All these were fighters who fought at the convention hall in West Philadelphia. You had Percy Bassett, who had a record of 64, 12-1, and 41 knockouts. Your former featherweight Benny Bass, who Kid Chocolate would defeat Benny Bass. And he roughed him up pretty good. And Benny Bass would be the second black featherweight champion, but he would be the second, well, I would say really the first black featherweight champion to win the title in Madison Square Garden, but he didn't unify. He was never universally recognized as a featherweight champion. Henry Armstrong was. So when Armstrong defeated Petey Cerrone in 37, he became the first American featherweight champion and the first black fighter to be universally recognized as the featherweight champion in America and in Madison Square Garden. George Dixon was from Canada, but Henry Armstrong was from America. Oh boy, boxing was something else, man. It really, really was. Now, Sammy Angott, when he came back, he would take on Luther Slugger White, and that was for the vacant NBA title. Luther Slugger White was something else, man. He was in a ring with Angott October 27th of 1943 in Los Angeles, California, 15 rounds. It was for the NBA lightweight championship title. But he was in a ring with fighters such as Leo Roddick, who was called the Chicago Flash. Yeah, Jimmy Leto out of Bayonne, New Jersey. Mike Evans, who's from South Philly, he was a lightweight. Eddie Cool and Tommy Spingal. Sammy Julian, Leroy Young Terry. Yeah, Rob Zanelli. I'm just thinking these guys out of the blue. I'm having fun remembering these things. Willie Joyce and Ike Williams and Lou Jenkins and Chalky Wright, Juan Zorita, Baby Casanova, Speedy Dado and Ali Spaldi. Tommy Springdale, Tippy Larkin, Bull Jack, Chalky Wright, Holman Williams, Charlie Burley, Coco Kidd, Archie Moore. Oh my God, some great, great fighters. Luther Slugger White was something else. He really, really was. And he came at a time when boxing was what it was, man. You couldn't throw hands, you couldn't be in a ring. October 29th of 1896, you had Jack Burnett and Martin Judge. It was at the Tuxedo Athletic Club in Philadelphia. June 21st of 1897, George Dixon would take on Kentucky Rosebud. It was at the Arena in Athletic Club, the World Featherweight Championship in Philadelphia. Philadelphia Jack O'Brien and Tommy Ryan at the National Athletic Club in Philadelphia, January 29th of 1904. It was on a Wednesday night, and it was raining that evening. Tommy Sharkey would take on Jack Monroe at the Interstate Athletic Club in Philadelphia, February 27th of 1904. You had Tommy Ryan and Jack Root, National Athletic Club in Philadelphia. It was on the evening of November 23rd, 1904. Tommy McGovern would take on Barry Nelson at the National Athletic Club in Philadelphia, March 14th of 1906. Kid Williams and Harry Smith, Olympic Athletic Club in Philadelphia, November 22nd of 1912. You had Benny Leonard, who was known as the Ghetto Wizard. He took on, who was it? It was Johnny Kilbane at the Shrine Park in Philadelphia. I'll tell you, Philadelphia had some of the greatest fights during their day, man. Billy Jones took on Pete Latzo, who was a welterweight, January 27th of 1930. It was at the Arena in Philadelphia. Tommy Loughlin, who was known as the Philly Phantom. He was something else, man. He took on Pierre Charles, who was from Canada. And Pierre Charles was a very good right-hand puncher when he was coming up at his time. Mitchell Wargas would take on Willie Lamarty, May 16th, 1930. It was the main event, New York's Madison Square Garden. You had Primo Carnera. He would take on George Godfrey, who was known as the Leaperville Shadow. At that time, George Godfrey was basically past his prime, and the opportunities that he was looking for, he didn't get. He was the colored heavyweight champion when he take on Larry Gans, who Larry Gans was from Canada. And this was in 1926, 1927, 1930. But he would get that title shot for the colored heavyweight championship title when Harry Wills was stripped of his title in 26, when he took on Jack Sharkey, the Boston Gob. And that's when the Leaperville Shadow, George Godfrey, would get his opportunity and take on Larry Gans. But George Godfrey would also take on Obie Walker. Obie Walker was in the ring with Elmer Vitamin 14 times. You also had a fighter by the name of Al Walker, who was also the colored heavyweight champion. Oh man, during those days you had some great ones. Al Singer, who would be knocked out. Tony Canzaneri. Tony Canzaneri would win the junior welterweight championship title. Al Singer was from New York. He was a very, very good fighter during his day. He would take on Sammy Mendel. And what was interesting, Al Singer would take out Sammy Mendel, and then Canzaneri would take out Al Singer, or vice versa. I can't remember how that went, but these guys were something else, man, I'll tell you. Thursday, July 30th in New York's Yankee Stadium. You had Tony Canzaneri, who would take on Benny Bass in Philadelphia Ballpark, July 21st, 1930. It was on a Monday evening. You had Kid Chalkley would take on Benny Bass, the junior lightweight championship title at the Philadelphia Ballpark, July 15th of 31. I'm pretty sure I have that date right. Man, I used to know these things at the top of my head. But yeah, boxing has a very rich history. So when you hear someone talk about boxing, they have to know the entire history to truly understand the game. You're not going to know everything in boxing, but you have to know the basics to really make the comparisons of what you're looking at today and what you'll understand from the history of yesterday. And that's why you can't compare eras. You have to celebrate the fighters in their own era, because there's no comparison. Like if you look at fighters today, there's no comparison with fighters of yesterday. You didn't have same-day weigh-ins. That stopped in 1984. And Michael Spinks, and you had Muhammad, what was his name? Eddie Gregory. I can't think of his Muslim name, but that's when the same day weigh-ins had stopped. So, they used to put gloves on in the ring, and everything changed. Rosin, you had to have, because the shoes that you had leather soles, so you had to step in a rosin box. So that was a very, very, and the canvas was not like it is now. It was very slick. So that's why you had to have rosin. So everything had changed. You had, the lights had bulbs, very hot. So it can go up to 100 degrees, 110 degrees in the ring. 15 rounds of fighting. The rules were different. Everything was different during that time. So you can't compare these guys. Back in the earlier day, they were having, I gave you an example. Henry Armstrong had 27 bouts in 1937 alone. That was not uncommon. So, of course, you're going to get picked off because you're fighting the very best. So when you get fights today where these guys are undefeated and they retire undefeated, they're not fighting real fights. They're not. They didn't fight in different arenas, not in their hometown. They didn't fight when the mob had to fix the fights. A different era. So you don't compare these guys, but you appreciate the fighters of today for what they give you. Because a lot of these fighters, they actually give it everything they have. And I totally respect the fighters of today. When you look at the Devin Haney's, Devin Haney is very unappreciated. He's a very, very good fighter. But Devin Haney is not tested well enough yet to give a good barometer on how good he can be on a historical level. Modern time, yes, not historical. He hadn't been tested enough. You got to fight your contemporaries, the Davises and the Stevensons. They all have to mix it up. No one gets a pass. Because if they were in the 40s and the 50s, they would all have fought each other. I told you, you had Ike Williams and Bo Jack and Bob Montgomery and Tippy Larkin. They all fought each other. So you can put them in categories. Ike Williams had moved up and faced fighters like Johnny Bratton as a welterweight. Remember when he fought Enrique Bolanos in California? Kid Chocolate would take on Roger Bernard in the ballpark in Philadelphia on a Wednesday evening, June 16th of 1952. Tommy Laughlin and Jack Sharkey. Yeah, Benny Bass and Eddie Cool. And Cleto Lizardi and Benny Bass. Benny Bass would also take on Johnny Jadek, who's a junior welterweight champion. Let me tell you something about what this game really is. 1922, the first junior welterweight champion was Pinky Mitchell. From that point, you had Tony Canzaneri. You had so many other good fighters coming up during that time who would pick up that strap. And as you know, today, the junior welterweight champion, 140 pounds. 1922, one of the greatest years in boxing history. But you have Richie and Pinky Mitchell, the Mitchell brothers. It was just three of them. They were something else. But Tony Canzaneri, just to bring his name up once again, I don't think you know what kind of fighter he really was. He would box with his hands down from side to side, in and out. Excellent foot movement, and he was very fast with his hands. He'd be in the ring with Lou Ambers and Barney Ross. Man, if Armstrong could have fought Canzaneri and if he could have fought Jimmy McLaurin, that would have been awesome. I believe if Armstrong was in line to fight McLaurin, had McLaurin not lost to Barney Ross in their third bout, that would have been interesting. A bout would have been interesting when Jack Britton had taken on Mickey Walker and he lost to Walker. Walker became the brand new welterweight champion. And I often thought when Benny Leonard took on Jack Britton and he had him down and he hit him while he was down and he was disqualified. Had he not hit him while he was down, he could have possibly become the welterweight champion of the world. What a fight that would have been between him and Mickey Walker. Oh, my God. Ray Robinson would take on Marty Servo on the evening of Thursday, September 25th of 1941 at the Convention Hall in Philadelphia. Oh, what a contest that was. Lou Salica would take on Tommy Forte. It would be their third match at Shibe Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on the evening of June 16th of 1941. It was for the World Bantamweight Championship title. Lou Salica was on the 19, and I told you this before, 32 Olympic team. He would be one of 3 men that would bring home a gold. Well, he didn't win a gold medal. He won a silver medal or bronze medal, I believe it was. But it was 3 fighters that came home with a medal of 5. And Harry Wiley Sr. was coaching that team until he was fired, just for standing up for his men. But Lou Salica was something else, man. I had conversations with him. He lived in Brooklyn, New York, and he had a very strong Italian accent. And he was something else. He came around the time with Pedro Martinez, and he had a man by the name of Victor Valdez from the Bronx, New York. He was the trainer for a very tall fighter. He took on Larry Holmes. His name was Jerry Cooney. And Victor Valley, his last champion, was a fighter from New Jersey. His name was Glenn with the Real Beast Brown. That was Valley's last champion. Victor Valley used to tell me so many things in Gleason's gym. Man, where did these trainers go? But you had fighters who had some great trainers. Willie Reddish, who was a light heavyweight out of Philadelphia, master at the shoulder roll. He was a great trainer, trained so many great fighters. He was in the ring with Sonny Liston as a trainer. He was in his corner. But he would train Meldrick Taylor as an amateur. Oh, I had so many great conversations with Willie Reddish. Quasi McCall, and you had Slim Jim Robinson, Bowie Fisher, Nazim Richardson. Oh, it was so many of these trainers during that time, man. So many of them. But I just wanted to bless Philadelphia with a small conversation. I can talk about Philadelphia for days. But shout out to Philadelphia. I mean, Bo Jack would take on Johnny Hutchinson in Shibe Park, July 19th, 1943. Bob Montgomery would be in the ring with Fritzy Zivik on a Monday night, August 23rd of 1943. This is at Shibe Park. Montgomery would also be in the ring with Ike Williams on a Tuesday night, January 25th of 44. That was their first fight. And Bob Montgomery had knocked out Ike Williams in 6 rounds. In 1947, Ike Williams would knock out Bob Montgomery in 6 rounds. And he would take the New York SAC lightweight championship title, and he would unify the title. He already had the NBA. Took from Juan Zarita in 1945. Stopped him in 2 rounds in Mexico City. You know, Ike Williams was one of the most devastating lightweight punchers of all times. And when he lost to Jimmy Carter at Madison Square Garden in 1951 and 14 rounds, my God, that was, I mean, till this day, that brings me chills. Because my grandfather always told me stories about Jimmy Carter. He lived in the neighborhood. And my dad knew who Ike Williams was. He knew who Jimmy Carter was. He used to walk from Stillman's Gym to the train station with Jimmy Carter and Sandy Sadler. And it was a guy by the name of Bob Satterfield. All of those guys. Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff Series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thank you so much for listening to me rant about some of these great fighters. You take care, and I'll speak to you later. You know what? I'm gonna speak to you a little further. I have a little more space on my recording here. Sugar Ray Robinson took on George Sugar Costner on a Wednesday evening, March 22nd of 1950 at the Convention Hall in Philadelphia. George Sugar Costner was KO'd in one round. It was by Ray Robinson. It was his World Welterweight Championship title because Sugar Costner would carry the name Sugar, and Ray Robinson didn't like it. He said there's only one Sugar. So they said they'll sell it in the ring. And he fought him twice and knocked him out both times in one round. And Costner saw Ray Robinson at a dinner with his wife, and he asked his wife if he can dance. And she said, "You believe he's asking me to dance?" And Ray Robinson said, "Go ahead and dance with him. Show him how to dance as I showed him how to fight." Ray Robinson would take on Robert Villemain on Monday evening, June 5th, 1950. It was scheduled for 15 rounds at the Municipal Stadium. We talked about that. It was at Penn State, and they would win the Penn State Middleweight Championship title. Ray Robinson they won that title before he would win the Middleweight Championship title from Jake LaMotta, February 14th, 1951. This was at Chicago Stadium. Now, Robert Villemain was 5'5.5", had a 68.5-inch reach. He was from Paris, France. He was being in the ring with fighters such as Laurent Joutiel and Kid Marcel, Eugene Warzak. You had Danny Nordico and Eugene Hairston and Jose Basora, Joe Blackwood, Carl Bobo Olsen, Normal Hayes. Who else was in the ring? Jake LaMotta, many of them. Ike Williams would take on Fitzy Putin on a Wednesday night, April 11th of 1951 at Chicago Stadium, lightweight. You had, Gil Turner would also be in the ring with Charlie Fusari. Gil Turner was in the ring with Charlie Fusari July 9th, 1951. It was for the welterweight contenders, Shy Park and Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Jersey Joe Walcott being with Eddie Charles for their fourth time. Municipal Stadium, Philadelphia, June 5th, 1952, for the World Heavyweight Championship title. Jersey Joe Walcott was something else, man. He could really fight. Kid Gavilan would take on Gil Turner. I told you on the evening of July 7th, 1952, at the Municipal Stadium in Philadelphia for the welterweight championship title. And Gil Turner would be stopped in 11 rounds, but that was a hell of a contest. Rocky Marciano would take on Jersey Joe Walcott at the Municipal Stadium in Philadelphia, September 23rd, 1952, for the World Heavyweight Championship title. And he would knock him out in 13 rounds, and that was a hell of a punch, a hell of a right-hand punch. Gil Turner would take on Bobby Dykes Thursday, November 18th. You're talking about some fights, man. All right, thanks for listening. Take care. Peace.